The desert city never really sleeps. Even in the small hours of a weekday night, Dubai's skyline glittered like a string of stars fallen to earth, glass towers catching the moonlight, traffic humming softly below. But tonight, amid the glamour, blue and red flashes pulsed against the sleek facade of the Horizon Residence's penthouse complex. Curious onlookers gathered at the edge of the boulevard, their voices a mixture of hushed Arabic, Tagalog, and English. News alerts were already popping up on phones. Breaking! Dubai tech founder linked to late-night incident in luxury tower. The name Adrian Khalid, once synonymous with cutting-edge AI and million-dollar investments, was now trending for a reason no entrepreneur ever wanted. From a balcony 28 stories above the street, a crime scene team moved deliberately, cameras clicking. A sheet-covered stretcher was wheeled toward a waiting ambulance. The glittering skyline seemed almost indifferent, its neon blues and golds blinking as though nothing extraordinary had occurred. Inside the building's marble lobby, Rashid Khan, Adrian's oldest friend and business partner, stood frozen near the elevator, staring at the ground. His phone buzzed non-stop with messages from investors, journalists, and employees, but he couldn't bring himself to answer a single one. At the same time, across town in a small apartment in Dera, Elena Duarte, a Filipina waitress and Marisol's closest friend, scrolled through the headlines in disbelief. The woman she'd laughed with over late-night hollow and shared homesick tears with couldn't possibly be gone. But the words on her screen were unyielding. Adrian himself sat in a dimly lit interview room upstairs, the weight of silence pressing on him like a physical force. Just hours ago, his life had been a carefully curated success story, the startup darling of the Middle East, the proud husband of a vibrant Filipina wife, the man everyone envied. Now he stared at the table, replaying the sound of shattering glass and Marisol's name on his lips as if saying it could undo what had happened. Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm, luxury cars gliding along Sheikh Zayed Road, fountains dancing at the Burj Khalifa, tourists snapping selfies under palm-shaped islands. But for those who knew Adrian and Marisol, the night's glamour was an empty facade. Behind the glittering skyline, a love story had crumbled, leaving only questions and whispers in the warm desert air. Long before flashing sirens and scandalous headlines, Adrian Khalid was the poster child for Dubai's booming tech scene. At 38, he'd climbed from a cramped shared apartment in Karachi to the marble and glass boardrooms of the Gulf. Investors praised his vision, an AI platform that could optimize everything from urban traffic to financial portfolios. Yet behind the polished keynote speeches and tailored suits was a man who measured his worth by quarterly reports and venture rounds. Success, he believed, was the only language the world respected. Marisol Reyes' story began thousands of miles away, on a humid island in the Philippines. She had been the eldest of 5, the one who left to earn for the rest. Dubai promised opportunity, even if opportunity meant 12-hour shifts, polite smiles for impatient diners, and sending half her paycheck home. But she carried her optimism like armor. Her laughter could fill a room even on her most exhausting days. They met on an unlikely evening at a glittering tech gala at the Armani Hotel. Marisol wasn't supposed to be there. She was filling in as an event hostess for a sick coworker. She stood near the edge of the ballroom, balancing a tray of champagne flutes and secretly marveling at the city's elite. Adrian noticed her first, not just her beauty, but the quick, genuine smile she gave a shy junior engineer who'd spilled a drink on himself. In a room full of calculated charm, her warmth was disarming. He approached under the guise of thanking her for her professionalism, but one conversation turned into several. They discovered a shared love for late-night karaoke, his university nostalgia and her weekend escape, and an unlikely mutual fondness for mango sticky rice. By the end of the night, Adrian had scribbled his number on a cocktail napkin, a gesture so uncharacteristically spontaneous that Rashid teased him about it for weeks. Their courtship was a blur of contrasts. Marisol introducing Adrian to street food stalls in Dera, Adrian whisking her to yacht parties along the Marina. She marveled at the desert sunsets from the passenger seat of his Aston Martin. He found himself lingering in Filipino cafes, learning Tagalog phrases to make her laugh. Within months, whispers began among Adrian's colleagues about how quickly he'd fallen. By the time he proposed, on a private beach lit by lanterns, the engagement had already made the city's social pages. Their wedding was the kind only Dubai could host, a grand desert resort transformed into a palace of glass lanterns, white orchids, and golden drapery. Guests from Manila, Karachi, London, and Riyadh toasted the couple beneath a canopy of stars. To outsiders, theirs was a fairy tale, a self-made tech genius and a vibrant Filipina beauty building a life of glamour together. But even that night, small fissures existed, unnoticed amid the celebration. Marisol caught Adrian checking his phone between dances, scanning an urgent email from a restless investor. Adrian, meanwhile, saw the faint hesitation in her eyes when photographers posed them for yet another perfect picture. Neither of them understood then how much weight those small cracks could bear. For the first few months after their wedding, Adrian and Marisol lived inside what seemed like a dream. Their penthouse at Horizon Residences overlooked the Arabian Gulf, and every sunrise painted the walls with gold. They hosted friends on their balcony, laughed over midnight shawarmas, and filled their Instagram feeds with snapshots of yacht parties and desert safaris. But beneath the curated moments, pressures quietly gathered. Adrian's company had secured a multi-million-dollar investment round just weeks before the wedding, and those investors expected results. His phone, rarely silent, became a third presence in their marriage. Marisol would wake at 2 in the morning to find him on the sofa, blue light flickering across his face as he stared at code or performance graphs. At first, she teased him. "Even geniuses need sleep," she'd whisper, draping a blanket over his shoulders. But the teasing became sighs, and the sighs became silent resentment. She had given up a tight-knit community back home, exchanged noisy family dinners for an echoing penthouse. Adrian's world, venture capital dinners, product launches, board meetings, rarely had room for the simple things she missed. Karaoke nights with friends, beach picnics with siblings, or phone calls that didn't have to be squeezed between conference calls. Her friend Alina noticed the change. Over coffee one afternoon, Marisol confessed, "Sometimes I feel like a prop in Adrian's success story, like I'm here to make the pictures look good." Alina, ever pragmatic, suggested she talk to him directly, but Marisol feared seeming ungrateful. After all, hadn't she always dreamed of a life like this? Adrian, for his part, sensed something was off but couldn't articulate it. He told Rashid, half joking, "I think Marisol misses karaoke more than she misses me." Rashid chuckled, but his eyes lingered with concern. Their world still looked perfect from the outside. Adrian unveiled a major AI contract with a government agency, and Marisol smiled dutifully at the gala, her sequined dress catching every camera flash. Yet, as they drove home that night, the silence between them felt heavier than the desert air. Marisol turned to watch the city lights streak by the car window. Adrian kept his hands tight on the steering wheel, glancing at his phone at the next red light. Neither noticed the small gulf opening between them, quiet but deepening, an unseen crack that would one day swallow everything. The desert wind rattled the balcony doors one late evening as Marisol stared out over Dubai's Marina. The city glittered as if nothing could tarnish its perfection, but she felt like a ghost drifting through Adrian's penthouse. His shoes sat neatly by the door, his suits pressed in the closet, but the man himself was miles away, buried under product deadlines and investor calls. Adrian's company, Synaptech, had just secured a critical government contract. The deal promised to catapult them into the upper echelon of global tech firms, but the pressure to deliver was suffocating. His conversations with Rashid became curt, his attention span fragmented, his laughter rare. Even when he was physically present, his mind was 1,000 miles away. Marisol, meanwhile, was learning how loneliness could bloom even in crowded, glittering places. Her work at the restaurant was no comfort. Every night she smiled for customers while her chest ached with unspoken words. Alina was her lifeline, always ready with a joke or a listening ear, but even she couldn't bridge the widening gap between Marisol and her husband. Then came Daniel Cruz, a senior developer Adrian had poached from a competitor months earlier. Daniel was kind in a way that felt uncalculated. When he stopped by the restaurant with colleagues one evening, he recognized her immediately from company gatherings. They chatted briefly, just small talk about Synaptech's latest project and the absurdity of Dubai's traffic. But for Marisol, the conversation felt like a glass of water in a desert. Daniel listened, really listened, his gaze attentive and unhurried. Their paths began crossing more often, a chance encounter at a downtown coffee shop, a quick hello at an office event where Marisol had joined Adrian. Each time, Daniel's warmth was a quiet balm. He asked about her family in the Philippines, remembered her youngest brother's name, and teased her about her obsession with Halo Halo. There was no hint of impropriety at first, just two lonely souls finding brief respite in conversation. Back at home, Adrian grew more distant. He began sleeping in the guest room after late nights at the office, claiming he didn't want to disturb her. Marisol tried to confront him gently, but their talks spiraled into defensiveness. He felt accused of neglect when he was fighting for their future. She felt dismissed, as though her emotional needs were trivial compared to his business empire. The balcony, once their shared haven for sunsets, became her solitary escape. The first unmistakable sign of trouble came at a Synaptech launch party. Adrian was busy charming investors, leaving Marisol alone with a glass of champagne. Daniel approached, asking if she was okay. She forced a smile, but he saw through it. "You look like you're at someone else's party," he said softly. The words pierced her carefully maintained facade. For the rest of the night, she couldn't shake the guilt of how much comfort she found in his company. In the weeks that followed, Daniel and Marisol began texting, light, harmless messages at first. Restaurant recommendations, funny memes, updates on mutual acquaintances. But as Adrian's work consumed him, the messages grew more personal. Daniel confided about his own failed relationship and how Dubai could feel like a city of beautiful strangers. Marisol found herself sharing pieces of her heart she hadn't dared reveal even to Alina. Alina noticed the change immediately. "Is there something you're not telling me?" she asked one afternoon over coffee. Marisol hesitated, then shook her head. "It's nothing, I just miss home." But her friend wasn't convinced. One rainy evening, a rarity in Dubai, Daniel offered Marisol a ride home after her shift. Traffic snarled along Sheikh Zayed Road as rain slicked the asphalt. They talked about childhood memories, about what they'd give up to relive one perfect day. When he dropped her off, a lingering silence filled the car. She thanked him quietly and slipped out, heart pounding. Nothing had happened, but something had undeniably shifted. That night, Adrian returned late, exhausted and irritable. Marisol was still awake, the faint scent of rain in her hair. She wanted to tell him everything, the loneliness, the fear of losing what they'd built. But his distracted glance at his phone killed the words on her tongue. He muttered a quick good night and disappeared into the guest room. The next morning, she found herself staring at Daniel's last message. "You deserve to be seen, Marisol." She knew she was venturing onto dangerous ground. Yet in that moment, the words felt like a lifeline. Outside, the desert sun burned bright over Dubai's skyscrapers, but inside their marriage, shadows lengthened. The fault lines had been drawn. Dubai's winter months brought a softer sun and cooler nights, but inside Horizon residences, the air between Adrian and Marisol was heavy and brittle. The penthouse's wide windows still framed postcard-perfect views, the Burj Khalifa like a gleaming needle against the horizon, the Marina alive with yacht lights. But beauty no longer meant peace. Adrian poured himself into Synaptech as though the company's success could plug the holes in his personal life. His days stretched past midnight, a blur of strategy meetings and code reviews. To investors, he was tireless and brilliant. To Marisol, he was absent. Meanwhile, Daniel's presence in her life grew quietly stronger. Their text conversations became daily habits, sometimes innocent, like sharing a funny meme about Dubai traffic, other times far more intimate. He asked about her siblings by name, remembered birthdays, and sent a photo of a street food stall in Manila because he knew it would remind her of home. One Thursday evening, Daniel invited her to a small cafe tucked away in Alquoz, far from the city's prying eyes. "Just coffee," he'd said. The cafe was quiet, filled with the smell of cardamom and soft acoustic guitar playing through the speakers. As they talked, Marisol felt seen in a way she hadn't for months. She laughed freely, her shoulders loosening for the first time in weeks. They didn't cross any physical line that night, but as she caught her reflection in the cafe's window, her hand resting too comfortably on the table near his, she felt the weight of what was happening. Guilt pricked her skin like static electricity. Yet when she returned home to Adrian hunched over his laptop, barely looking up, the guilt blurred into resentment. Rashid began to notice Adrian's fraying edges at work. In one late-night strategy session, Adrian snapped over a minor mistake, his voice sharper than usual. When Rashid gently suggested taking a weekend off, Adrian dismissed him. "I can't afford to slow down now," he said, but even he knew he wasn't just talking about the company. Marisol's friend Elena sensed the shift too. "You're different," she told her one afternoon. "Is there someone else?" Marisol hesitated before whispering, "I don't know what's happening. I'm not that kind of person." Elena squeezed her hand but said nothing more. The tension finally crept into public view during Synaptech's quarterly celebration at a rooftop lounge. Adrian barely noticed Marisol that evening, too busy charming a cluster of investors. Daniel, dressed sharply but keeping a respectful distance, watched her from across the room. When she stepped outside for fresh air, he followed. Under the glow of the city, Daniel said quietly, "You don't have to pretend with me." The simple sentence shattered her defenses. She admitted she felt invisible, like part of Adrian's Dacre rather than his partner. Daniel didn't offer solutions, he simply listened. But in that silence, a dangerous intimacy was born. Later that night, Adrian spotted them speaking on the terrace. Though nothing inappropriate occurred, the sight lodged in his chest like a splinter. At home, he asked casually, "You and Daniel seem close." Marisol froze, then brushed it off. "We just talked about your launch party." But the hesitation in her voice betrayed her. The next day, Adrian found himself watching the office's security footage after hours, his mind gnawing at possibilities. He told himself it was paranoia, that his stress was playing tricks on him, but the doubt had already taken root. Marisol, meanwhile, began to dread the silences at home. The more Adrian withdrew, the more she leaned on Daniel for emotional refuge. Their messages took on a tender tone. When Daniel texted, "You deserve someone who notices when you're in pain," her heart both ached and leapt. One evening, after another lonely dinner, Marisol stood on the balcony, gazing down at the glittering highway. The city below seemed alive and indifferent, swallowing secrets without judgment. Her phone buzzed, Daniel again, asking if she was okay. She hesitated, then typed, "Sometimes I feel like I don't exist here." His reply came instantly, "You exist to me." Though no vows had been broken in action, a quiet line had already been crossed. Marisol slipped her phone into her pocket as Adrian walked in, his face illuminated by the glow of an incoming email. He kissed her on the cheek absent-mindedly and muttered something about a bored call. The distance between them was now a chasm, one neither wanted to acknowledge openly, but both could feel. Beneath Dubai's dazzling lights, beneath the surface of their perfect life, the fracture widened, inching them closer to a night that would redefine them forever. The evening began like any other, a warm breeze over Dubai Marina, the sky painted coral and indigo. Adrian returned home later than usual, his suit jacket slung over his arm, the sharp scent of cologne barely masking the exhaustion clinging to him. Marisol was on the balcony, her phone in hand, staring out at the illuminated skyline. When she turned, the expression on her face was distant, unreadable. "Late again," she said lightly, but her voice trembled just enough to betray her feelings. Adrian loosened his tie and poured himself a drink. "The investor pitch ran over," he replied. He wanted to keep it casual, but there was a tremor under his words too, an awareness of the growing space between them. They ate dinner in silence. The city lights flickered beyond the glass, and the sound of traffic below seemed louder than usual. Finally, Adrian set his fork down with a sharp clink. "We need to talk," he said. Marisol's breath caught. She'd been waiting for this moment, but now that it was here, she felt unsteady. "About what?" "About you, about us." He studied her face, searching for a trace of the woman who used to laugh at his terrible jokes. "I saw you on the terrace with Daniel that night." Marisol looked away. "It was just a conversation." Adrian's voice rose. "Was it? Because you don't even talk to me like that anymore." Her head snapped back toward him, anger flashing in her eyes. "Maybe because you're never here. You're married to your company, Adrian. I feel like a placeholder in your life." The words hung in the air, heavier than either expected. Adrian felt them sink deep, but his pride stiffened. "I built this life for us," he said quietly. "For you." Tears welled in Marisol's eyes. "I didn't marry a penthouse or a yacht. I married you." The room fell silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. Outside, a helicopter buzzed over the marina, its lights tracing a brief arc through the dark. Adrian swallowed hard. "Are you in love with him?" She hesitated too long. That pause, more than any words, cracked something inside him. "I don't know," she whispered. The confession sliced through him. He stood abruptly, the glass of whiskey tipping over and spilling across the table. The amber liquid ran over the edge, pooling on the marble floor. "You don't know," his voice was low, but the tremor in it was dangerous. "After everything I've given you." "It's not about what you've given me," Marisol cried. "It's about what we've lost." Her phone buzzed on the counter, another message from Daniel. The screen lit up briefly and Adrian saw his name. Something inside him snapped. He grabbed the phone before she could, staring at the unread message. "Give it back," she said, her voice tight. But Adrian didn't move. His knuckles whitened around the phone. "Did you ever love me?" he asked, softer now, almost broken. Her lip quivered. "I still do," she said, tears spilling, "but I don't even recognize us anymore." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The city outside carried on, oblivious. Cars sped across Sheikh Zayed Road, and music thumped faintly from a rooftop bar. Inside the penthouse, their perfect world felt like it was collapsing in slow motion. Adrian set the phone down and backed away, his chest heaving. "I need air," he muttered, stepping out onto the balcony. Marisol followed, the glass door sliding shut behind her with a soft click. The view was breathtaking. The marina's lights glittered like scattered jewels, and the Burj Khalifa glowed in the distance. But neither saw its beauty. They stood in the wind, two people who had once been inseparable, now separated by choices, secrets, and silence. Marisol reached for him, but Adrian stepped just out of reach. "I don't know if I can forgive this," he said. "I don't know if I can keep living like this," she replied. The words struck like blows, final and irreversible. Somewhere far below, a car horn blared, a reminder that life went on, indifferent to their private storm. They remained there, staring out at the city they'd once claimed as their kingdom, not knowing that this confrontation was only the beginning. The storm they'd been circling was about to break, and before the night was through, their glittering world would be shattered beyond repair. The next evening, Dubai's skyline shimmered as usual, but the penthouse felt colder than the desert wind outside. Adrian had barely spoken all day, his mind looping through images of Marisol's hesitation, Daniel's name glowing on her phone, and the years he'd poured into a marriage that now seemed hollow. Marisol, desperate to bridge the gap, cooked his favorite meal, garlic butter shrimp with saffron rice, but the gesture fell flat. Adrian barely touched his plate. The clink of his fork against porcelain echoed like a gunshot in the silent dining room. "Are we just going to sit here pretending this isn't happening?" she asked quietly. His jaw tightened. "I don't know what's left to say." The air between them was thick, electric. Marisol reached for his hand, but he pulled away. "You think I wanted this?" she whispered. "You think I planned to feel invisible?" Her words struck him like a slap. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping across the marble floor. Invisible, you have everything, a life most people only dream of. But not you, Adrian, I don't have you. The raw truth of her words left him breathless. He turned toward the balcony, staring out at the city lights as if the view could steady him. Behind him, Marisol's phone buzzed again, Daniel, no doubt. The sound felt like a blade twisting in his chest. In a rush of anger and pain, Adrian snatched the phone. Is this who you run to when you're lonely? Marisol stepped forward, her voice trembling. Give it back. The argument escalated, sharp words, accusations, each one heavier than the last. Marisol tried to take the phone from him, but Adrian stepped backward, his temper fraying. The balcony door stood open, the city humming far below. For a split second, their eyes met, two people drowning in hurt. Then, in the chaos of movement, Marisol stumbled as she tried to grab her phone. Adrian reached for her instinctively, but his hand slipped. Time seemed to fracture. The glittering skyline, the distant sound of traffic, her gasp, all froze in a terrible instant. And then she was gone, her scream swallowed by the wind as she fell toward the marina's cold water and concrete. Adrian stood rooted to the balcony, his breath ragged, the phone still clutched in his hand. Below, alarms began to sound, voices shouting from the street. The perfect life he had built, his company, his marriage, his dreams, had shattered in a heartbeat. The city's lights glittered on, indifferent, as sirens began to wail in the distance. The marina was alive with flashing red and blue lights. Police cars and ambulances clustered beneath Horizon residences, their sirens silenced but their presence deafening. A small crowd had gathered, phones raised, their whispers threading through the cool night air. The glittering city that had been their playground was now a stage for tragedy. Adrian stood frozen on the balcony, the wind tugging at his shirt. His hands trembled, the phone, still unlocked, slipping from his grasp and clattering onto the marble floor. He stared into the darkness below where paramedics surrounded Marisol's motionless body. The world felt unreal, as if he were watching a stranger's nightmare. When the knock came at his door minutes later, it was hard and authoritative. "Dubai Police," a voice called. Adrian opened the door mechanically, his face pale. Two officers entered, their expressions professional but grave. "Sir, we need you to come with us," the taller officer said. His name tag read LT, F. Al-Mansouri. Adrian's voice cracked. "It was an accident, I tried to—" "We'll take your statement," the officer interrupted gently, "but we need you to remain calm." The elevator ride down felt endless. The penthouse that once symbolized success now loomed above him like a monument to failure. Outside, the scene was a blur, yellow tape, murmuring onlookers, the sharp scent of sea air mixed with diesel. At Al-Barsha police station, Adrian sat in a stark interrogation room under fluorescent lights that made his skin look sallow. Across from him, LT, Al-Mansouri, opened a file. "Mr. Khalid," he began, using Adrian's family name, "witnesses heard shouting before your wife's fall. Can you explain what happened tonight?" Adrian swallowed hard. "We argued about our marriage, about another man, but I didn't," his voice faltered. "I didn't mean for her to." The officer watched him carefully, pen poised. "Did you push her?" "No," Adrian's voice rose before collapsing into a whisper. "No, she slipped. I reached for her, but—" He buried his face in his hands. The next hours blurred into a storm of procedures. Statements taken, evidence collected, his hands swabbed for prints. Daniel was summoned as a person of interest. He arrived looking stunned, his face ashen, his voice shaking as he confirmed their friendship but denied any physical relationship. By morning, news of Marisol's death had begun circulating on local social media groups. Screenshots of the flashing lights below Horizon residences spread quickly. Anonymous commenters speculated wildly about money, infidelity, even corporate sabotage. Rashid arrived at the station mid-morning, his expression unreadable. He placed a firm hand on Adrian's shoulder. "Tell them the truth," he said quietly. "Tell them everything." Adrian was released under watch after hours of questioning. He returned to the penthouse, which now felt like a mausoleum. Marisol's favorite shawl was still draped over the couch. Her perfume lingered faintly in the bedroom. On the kitchen counter, the saffron rice from the night before sat untouched, a silent reminder of their last dinner. Over the next few days, investigators pieced together the sequence of events. Neighbors recalled muffled shouting. Security cameras showed Adrian pacing the balcony minutes before Marisol's fall. There was no evidence of premeditated violence, no bruises suggesting a struggle, no signs of planning. Still, suspicion clung to him like smoke. Daniel's interview deepened the complexity. He admitted to being emotionally close to Marisol, his voice breaking as he insisted. She was unhappy, but she loved him. She didn't want to leave him. To the police, it painted a picture of a troubled marriage on the edge, not a clear-cut crime. The Filipino community in Dubai mourned quietly. Marisol's friends organized a vigil at St. Mary's Church. Candles flickered as hymns were sung, the congregation whispering prayers for her soul. Adrian attended, standing in the back, his face a mask of grief and guilt. When Alina approached him, her eyes red-rimmed, she said only, "She deserved to be happy." The words pierced him. Rashid tried to shield Adrian from the media frenzy, but investors grew restless. Synaptech's board called an emergency meeting, worried that the scandal would taint the company's reputation. Adrian showed up late, unshaven, and distracted. The algorithms he once obsessed over seemed meaningless now. As weeks passed, the official report concluded, death by misadventure. There was insufficient evidence to charge Adrian with murder, yet the finding brought no relief. In the court of public opinion, rumors persisted. Some believed he had snapped in a jealous rage, others whispered that Marisol had leapt intentionally. Alone in the penthouse one night, Adrian scrolled through old photos, Marisol laughing on a desert safari, her hair whipping in the wind, her hand in his. He closed his laptop and stared out at the Marina's glittering skyline. The city hadn't changed, but he had. The lights below still twinkled like promises, but for him, they would forever remind him of a fall he couldn't stop and a love he couldn't save.